Wait, you're not supposed to be drunk when you try to do
some
auction?
people do, and it is, it's their style, but I've seen people who are so drunk that they can barely speak. And I'm like, this is not a joke for the Boys and Girls Club. Like, this is whether or not their lights are on next year.
I have the I'm willing to carry a doggy bag out of a fancy restaurant confidence.
I was the head of events. I arrived to work, and I cried the entire lunch to one of our biggest clients.
You're never going to be perfectly happy all the time. The best you can hope for is to be reasonably happy. Most of the time.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Reasonably Happy with Paul Ollinger. Today, my guest has a really interesting career track and life that I can't wait to share with you. Her name is Lydia Fenet. She's the author of 2 books. One is called Claim Your Confidence. The other one is The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. And she's the host of the Claim Your Confidence podcast and the former global managing director for Christie's auction house. So we're going to talk about that. Welcome, Lydia.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, although I thought I was coming on a different podcast. So now I know.
You did? Oh,
Yeah.
You thought it was Crazy Money.
I did, yes.
We're in the chrysalis.
Yes.
We're transforming.
Great.
We're going from a beautiful caterpillar to an even more beautiful butterfly.
I'm here for the ride.
All right. So, let's talk about chrysali and transformation. How does somebody become a world-class auctioneer?
Well, to become a really good auctioneer, you need to spend a lot of time on stage. But my story started before that. I was an intern at Christie's during college.
Okay. And where did you go to college? I find this fascinating.
This was not a college for auctioneers. I went to the University of the South in
Monteagle, Tennessee.
No, it's Sewanee,
It's
Tennessee. It's close to Monteagle.
It's close to the truck stop in Monteagle.
It's true. It is close to the
Yes.
truck. We got a lot of really good beer from that truck stop in Monteagle, if I think back to those days.
Let's see if you did any research. Do you know where I went to college?
I did not. I do not. But you're not coming on my podcast for a couple of weeks, so I have some time, Paul.
Okay. I went to Rhodes College.
Oh my gosh, our biggest rival.
That's right.
Oh, I did not know that.
Massive Division III athlete pillow fights in football and basketball between
Exactly. Well said.
Sewanee and Rhodes College.
Very well said.
So you did an internship at Christie's. How'd you get that?
Well, I actually read an article in Vanity Fair magazine when I was in college, and it was...
So you're reading Vanity Fair in college.
I was reading Vanity
There's one
Fair.
little clue as to who you are.
But actually, not even that. I had a subscription. I think I was in an airport, and it was a beautiful cover of Princess Diana. I can still remember this exact magazine. And I was just standing there flipping through it, and I saw this article about her dresses being sold at a place called Christie's in New York City on Park Avenue, where everybody who worked there was super fancy, and that it was this amazing place where art was transacted. But that was a very small part of it. It was really about the glamour and prestige of this place where people were going to this event with Princess Diana, all in black tie, and the people who worked there were super chic and traveled around the world. And I was probably 18 or 19, and I thought to myself, well, I think that this is the place I should work.
Why did you feel that way?
I was just drawn to the idea of this place where, first of all, everything that was being sold for philanthropy. I thought that was amazing. I thought the fact that Princess Diana was going to be there was also amazing. My mom is British, so I definitely was up super early for that wedding as a child.
Was it mom or mom?
She pushed mommy with a U, but we all really never adopted that and still call her mom.
Okay.
She's like, mommy, nope, still mom. But very British, to this day has lived in America since she was probably 22, is the most British person you've ever met in your life.
Meaning what?
Meaning that she is, will sing the Rule Britannia song. I mean, she really loves...
Britannia rules the waves.
Truly. And, our whole life has been very between England and America because she still has 3 sisters who she's very close with who live over there. So we would go and stay with all of them during the summer. So England's always been a huge part of my life. Like I feel half British for sure. And as a result...
Do you have a UK passport?
I don't. No, I didn't, because if we go back even further, my mother's father was a banker and she was born in Nassau in the Bahamas. And unless you're born in England, you cannot, it's not the same thing. My brother tried to get a passport. Yeah, it's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, for filling out those forms.
Was excommunicated from the British Empire, is what you're trying to say.
No, I think he too also really celebrated the British Empire. But my mom lived in England when she got older and went to school there and everything like that. So it was a really big part of our childhood.
Were you a big fashion person when you were younger?
I've always loved fashion, but not in the way that you would love fashion living in New York.
Right.
I love to put outfits together. I love colors, and the way that you look is very much a part of my mom's ethos. It's just, she gets up to go drop us off at the airport at 5:00 in the morning, and she comes in wearing a full face of makeup. And we're all like, how did you do that? She's like, well, I've been up since 3:30, putting my face on. So
I knew
different.
however I dressed today, I would look like a slob next to you. And that has definitely come to be.
And by the way, I am very dressed down.
I know
for me.
You're dressed down.
I'm wearing jeans.
You're
I
got
know.
a dressed down
it's an
look.
elevated dress down.
I was curious if because everything I've seen of her has been on stage for a Christie's auction, and you're to the nines. Everything's perfect. You're in your pink pantsuit talking to Google.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, so how do you dress when you come to a podcast? And it's perfect.
Well, I would have gone one level higher, but I figured that because you didn't seem to be in like a tuxedo, I should dress in normal people clothes. This is literally the most dressed down I will ever be.
Oh,
truly.
you look great. So we've just relocated my family to New York. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when we told my now 13-year-old daughter we were going to move to New York, she said, why don't we go to London? And I was like, tap the brakes.
Daughter.
Yeah,
I love her
she's
already.
cool. She's very cool. We had a great time there over Thanksgiving a few years ago where I got COVID and spent the week sweating in the flat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a blast. Okay, where was I going with all of that?
We were talking about auction.
We're talking about clothes when I want to get back to the auction. But I wonder when I lived here twice before, I was definitely more into the clothing. Now I was also younger and singler, and sort of dressing to impress. And now that I, one, don't have a real job, and two, I'm not looking for a spouse. Like, I wonder how I'm going to dress in a year, because Barney's is done. Barney's is gone.
Barney's is dead. But there's so many other great places to go, and that's the beauty of New York right now. I mean, I was here right after COVID when the city was kind of coming back very, very slowly. I would say this is the first year where I feel like we're almost back to the way it was pre-COVID. And one of the things that's been really fun to see in New York is how everything that was shuttered and shut down is now coming back in a new life. I was walking up 6th Avenue, actually, because I thought that this podcast was on 7th Avenue for a while. And then I checked my phone and realized I had to get on the subway pretty quickly. But I was walking up 6th Avenue, and there was this whole block of stores that has been vacant and really kind of gross. And all of a sudden someone's taken them over, and each one is cuter than the next.
Gray's Papaya is back.
No, Gray's Papaya is not back, thankfully. But actually, I do love Gray's Papaya, so I don't mean it like that. But I will say that this block looks great, and it feels like New York, the way New York used to be.
Right. Storefronts should be filled, and streets should feel vibrant and fun and all that. Yeah. Okay. So back to you. You got this internship at Christie's, and clearly you made an impression on these folks, and they made an impression on you. What was that like?
So my first internship was during a summer. I lobbied the woman who ran the internship coordinating program to get that internship because, frankly, they didn't have any internships available at that point. I was calling about 6 weeks before the internship program was to start. And really at that time, pretty much all the interns were people who had connections, which I didn't have. So I was cold calling.
None?
Really none.
Did you not go to the Taft School?
I went to the Taft School, but Christie's is its own thing. And I say this to people all the time. I'm like, Christie's is a next level. I mean, your biggest clients are people who have yachts that are, with helicopter pads. It's not just wealthy. It's a level of wealth that you really cannot imagine.
I want to come back to what that business is, because it's something I never thought about. So, but finish the thoughts, the first impressions you had, then we'll come back to that.
I loved it from the minute I walked in.
Yeah.
I really did. I felt at home there. I mean, people, first of all, dressed up. We talked about that today. That British sensibility.
I couldn't walk in there like this unless I was Larry Ellison or somebody like that.
But interestingly, that was a really funny thing about Christie's. When I first started there, the contemporary art department, which is really the department that is very casual and low key, was one of the smaller sales. So evening sales, which were the big sales where you're transacting millions and millions of dollars. People
Picasso's,
in black
Matisse's,
tie.
things like that.
Like, think about a museum, Monet's, Manet's, Renoir's. That was the forefront of the art world at that point. And so everything was very formal. And the people who came in were so beautifully presented and dressed. And everything about it was what I'd read in that magazine.
Right.
But the workers who work in the back, even though you're dressed like that, you're still doing the grunt work.
Sure.
You're licking the envelopes. I was shredding paper the whole summer. I mean, you're laughing, but like you're polishing furniture. That's what you're doing in the events department before an event.
Yeah. Good.
And truly that's the magic of it, because in a way, the funny thing about Christie's, the harder you work, the longer you stay, because you really become part of the cultural fabric of the company. And that's really how I felt. That's why I stayed for 23 years. I felt like that was my home in New York. And you get caught up and swept up into this magical world of auction, which I truly think is one of the more special places you could ever work.
What is Now, when I think of auctions, I think of Christie's and Sotheby's.
Right.
Is that pretty much, is that 90% of the market?
Yes, those are the top two. Then there's Phillips. And then there are a lot of sort of middle level that deal with the things that, you have a beautiful home and you want to sell it and there are a couple of pieces of furniture in it. Those would probably go through a Bonhams or a Heritage or a Heinemann auction house. But if you want
Not Goodwill or Disabled American Veterans, which is what my furniture went to.
Right. So that would be a different thing and not an auction house. And perhaps you wouldn't make money on that sale.
No.
But at the highest level, those pieces are coming to those houses because they have the databases of the people who can actually afford them. They have contact regularly with them. In addition to that, they're very well known. So if you want to sell a Picasso and you want it to be sold on the open market, you're probably either selling it through one of those two houses or you're working with a top tier gold star art advisor.
So how does Christie's, or how do you build that business with that ultra high net worth individual? Are you just sort of networking and saying, we know you have this great collection, we'd love to be your partner? How does that conversation go?
Well, Christie's has been around since 1766. I tried for many years to put the taglines, Christie's were older than America, but it never really took off.
Yeah.
But anyway, I feel like maybe you, and seeing your face, I now realize why it didn't take off. But anyway.
No. It puts a stake in the ground of its maturity, and I think that would be interesting to make. Maybe you wouldn't say in exactly those words in a tagline,
yeah, exactly.
but in a presentation, it's like, hey, we've been around since before the revolution. So.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, when you ask about the ultra high net worth individual and how you cultivate it, because the company has been around for so long, and because in the auction and art world, which is a pretty rarefied world at the highest level, there are only those two names being thrown around. That has a lot to do with it. But then kind of going back to what I said about the people who are interning at Christie's, a lot of our clients have grown up in families where art is a huge part of their life. So they are used to seeing those masterpieces on the walls of their homes or the homes of people they know.
Right.
So that's one client. But then you also have the client who's made a lot of money in technology or a hedge fund. And that's kind of where you saw the rise of the contemporary client, because then it became a status symbol. And then for many people, it became an investment or an asset.
Right. Yeah.
And so those additional classes have also been created over the past couple of decades. And that's a really interesting client. So to answer your question about how you interface with the ultra high net worth client, you're in the right place. You're in the places that they are. You are at the charity galas where the charity auctioneer is on stage in front of all of your potential clients. You're sitting at those tables. You're staying at the right hotels. You're going to the correct restaurants. And so you're just becoming part of this fabric of auction and art related people who travel in certain places at certain times for the auctions and for the art fairs. And like anything else in any career, it's about networking,
Is that a lot of pressure to have to be in the right places at the right times and look the right way and say the right things?
I think it's pressure if you don't like it. I loved it. I love networking. I'm an extrovert. And so for me to go to a dinner every single night and sit next to someone who I've never met and learn about their collection and get to know them felt like a really energizing part of the job. I think if you're an introvert, no, I think it would be hell, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
But some of the introverts and the specialists who were so academic are the reason that those auction houses are so successful. Because if you are a hedge fund, let's pretend in your other job, you're a hedge fund manager who's just made,
I'm very close to that.
I see that about you, $100 million this year, and you've decided you want to jump into the art world. You know nothing about it, right? You never studied it.
Yeah.
You're a coder by night, whatever it is that has created this world around you that's allowed you to access this level of wealth.
Let's role play. Lydia, I've got an interest in art. How would you advise I go about that?
I think you should come to Christie's and I'll take you around a gallery and we can start there. Let me tell you about what we have on the walls. Get to know what you like. At the end of the day, it's always about buying what you like because regardless of the value, it's going to hang on your wall. So let's understand your taste and then we can start building a collection from there. Right.
I'm like a Manet collector just with fewer zeros. That's, and I try to buy stuff that's personal and that has that I have a personal connection to and that I like to look at. I don't really look at art as an investment. I'm not that sophisticated.
But let's say you have $100 million that's just come your way and you've decided some of that you wanted to spend some of that on art. And Manet is in fact something that's really appealing to you. What I might say to you is, we have these incredible sales that are coming up in Paris. Why don't I meet you in Paris? We'll go for a tour of the Louvre, see some of the big mayonnaise that you've always wanted to see. And then I'll take you to Christie's and we can enjoy the sale and go out for dinner and go to L'Avenue and have a cocktail afterwards. And you sort of build this lifestyle into it. And that's what people learn to expect. And that's why it's fun, because it really is a lifestyle. And then you feel part of the club.
Okay. So were you an art history major in
I
college?
was.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. But this raises an important point. You don't just auction off art.
No, in fact, I don't auction off art anymore.
So you're very fluent in art. You can make me feel comfortable about art, but I saw that you auctioned off classic cars.
Yes.
So how do you become fluent? How do you gain confidence as somebody who's telling somebody or asking somebody to bid a lot of money for a product that you don't understand inherently the same way you understand art?
Well, going back to what I said about the specialists and the introverts, and that's not to say that every specialist is an introvert by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the amazing things about being at an auction house, or now I am the principal auctioneer for a car company called Broad Arrow Group. The beauty of that is, you're right, I don't know that much about cars. I only started working with them 2.5 years ago, but I stand on stage with a reader who knows everything about cars. And the specialists in that room know everything about cars. And so much about the auction process is the trust of the people who you're working with. Because ultimately, if you trust what they're saying, like, this is a wonderful car, it's a great investment, you should buy it, it will drive, this mileage is true, like all of these things that are said, that's the reputation of the auction house. And so when I stand on stage and sell cars, I may not know that much about them, but I know that Alan, who I stand next to, knows a lot about them, and the other specialists do. So I have no problem selling that, because I know that the entire company is founded on honesty and transparency. And that's why I feel comfortable being on stage for them.
And then sports memorabilia. You have to auction off baseball cards and souvenirs and things like that. It's not souvenirs. What am I looking?
Memorabilia.
Memorabilia. That's what I was trying to come up with. It's same deal with that?
Well, that's different, because I don't work for a memorabilia company. Sometimes Broad Arrow will sell those.
But you've auctioned off sports memorabilia in the past?
Typically for charity auctions.
Okay.
And that's different, because that is not about who the auction house is behind me. That is a nonprofit that is benefiting from that.
Right.
So I have to put my trust that the nonprofit believes the person who's giving it to them.
All right. So speaking of nonprofit fundraisers, because I'm do comedy and because I go to some of those things, I've been asked to go on stage and be the auctioneer.
Yeah.
And it's way harder than you think it's going to be.
Right.
So how does
Correct.
What are the secrets? Well, I think when you see somebody doing something so fluently, there's that word again, like you do, you go, oh, well, look how easy it is. She's making it look so easy. And the same way with comedy, people go, oh, look how easy comedy is. And they go up there and they just bomb terribly. So how do you learn to become an auctioneer?
Well, I became an auctioneer when I was 24 years old. So if you go back to the story of Christie's, I was working in the events department. That's what I was hired to work into when I first started. And such a great job, so fun. We lived there. We literally were there all day, every day, and all night.
Right.
Because
Sounds like the startup world.
It is. I mean, entertainment's such a huge part of the auction culture that there's so many events and they're chronically understaffed. So you're just doing everything all the time. And there's so much fun in that. There's so much bonding in that. But one of the things that we would do a lot of times is accompany the auctioneers to the charity galas, and we would be bid spotters. So we would be the person in the back corner being like, this guy's bidding, sir, trying to help them out.
Right.
Because there are a lot of dark corners, there are a lot of spaces.
Yes.
And I used to do it so much that I would actually be the sort of like right-hand person to the auctioneer on stage. So I'd be what we called scribing. I would be taking down the notes as it was taking place.
Yep.
So I'd spend a lot of time with them right before. And, when I first started taking charity auctions, they were pretty low lift in the sense that they were always done as a favor. They were often selling someone's mom's quilt. A lot of time, I'm not kidding. I was like, I don't think this is going to raise any money. Correct.
Who wants a musty old quilt from an attic?
You would be shocked at what people try to sell in a charity auction. Please don't sell that. But the guys who I would take the auctions with were art auctioneers. So they were trained to be art auctioneers, which means that you're going into a brightly lit sale room in the morning. No one's really drinking. The people have arrived.
Not everybody's not drinking.
Most of the people are drinking probably. Yeah. But at the point when you're taking an art auction, people have arrived because they are there to buy the art.
They're investment people.
Right.
They're not high net worth people at a charity event or at a school fundraiser where they're like, oh, if I go, if I just, maybe I'll get a good round of golf and I can have some wine and see my buddy Joe.
Right. And also a lot of
the
times
room's loud and nobody's paying attention.
But they also don't know a lot of times that there's an auction. So that was kind of that was what I saw in my first 4 years of accompanying the auctioneers. And I would stand next to them and they were all like, God, I hate this. And then get on stage and I would think to myself, like, I see why, because you're terrible at this. Because they would get on stage and try to take a charity auction, which you've been on stage, so you know what it's like, as if they were taking an art auction. Very stiff, very formal, just spouting the numbers, no engagement with the crowd, because that's how you take an art auction, right? If you're selling a Picasso, you want someone who is like, they look like everything is buttoned up, everything is taking place in a very serious manner. But a charity auction is not the same thing. And so at that point, when I first arrived at Christie's, you had to be an officer in the company, which meant that most people who were auctioneers, they were all guys. They were probably in their late 30s, 40s, 50s. So many of them had families, and they didn't really want to be out at night doing a thankless job because you're volunteering your time when you do it on behalf of Christie's. And so there was a year where a bunch of the people just missed auctions. And there was one in particular that was kind of the catalyst for them sending out a company-wide email that said, anyone can try out.
Wow.
Like, everybody just come down. If you want to do this, just come try out. And so with no training, I went down with my boss and my boss's boss, and my boss at the time was a really funny woman who had a good sense of humor, but just got really scared on stage. And my boss's boss, when she gets on stage, it's like her voice goes into a dog whisper. Like, you literally cannot hear anything she's saying because she gets so nervous. Her face gets bright red. It was a 4-day tryout, and they were both cut in the first 2 days. And so day 3, I'm still there, and you're cut in half. Like the class is cut in half pretty much every day. And the last day, I was still there. I remember thinking, I think I might actually make this. And they passed 4 of us out of 20 something of us. And I was the only woman, and I was definitely the only one in my 20s. And the guys were definitely in their 30s and 40s. And it was so interesting because they didn't even really know what to do. But I remember the feedback was, we don't really know what to do with you, so we'll just send you to the auctions that nobody wants.
Right. Well,
I was 24 years old and I didn't really know anyone in New York. And the idea of being on stage at a charity gala with black tie people where I'm on stage, great. And I went out to that first auction and it was terrible because, I mean, you've been in comedy, so you know what it's like to get mowed over on stage.
Yeah.
And nobody in a charity auction, to this day, I will say this, it is the one place where people have no compunction about speaking over you whatsoever.
At a charity auction.
Oh, they don't care.
Well, they're there for, it's a social event.
Right.
And they're commenting on what's going on in the room, and they're like, I wouldn't pay that for that piece of garbage.
And they're 9 glasses of wine in if everything's going well.
Totally.
And especially in the first decade, that was really what it was like for me.
And what were you selling, like vacations to Tuscany?
Maybe the worst thing you've ever sold, and I've sold 50 of them.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever sold besides the musty old blanket?
A pony, a plot of land in Argentina. I mean,
really?
The most bizarre things. People are like, what do you think about this? And at the time, because I was such a people pleaser, I'd always be like, yes, of course we can sell your grandmother's quilt. I think that will go well, especially because part of it has been burned off in a fire. I mean, it was like the most random things you've ever seen. But like anything, and we were talking about this earlier, over time, if you practice and you become better and you gain confidence in what you're doing, you start to see where the cracks are and why things are going wrong. And I didn't have enough confidence because, especially in my 20s, I didn't look like anybody else who was on stage. And so people didn't respect me. And I'd walk in and they would say, you know, where's the auctioneer? And I'd be like, I'm the auctioneer. They're like, no, but you know, the real auctioneer who's supposed to be here. And so I was always fighting against that.
But did it delight you in some way that you were an underdog, that you took people by surprise, or did that happen later?
That happened later. In my early 20s, it was really unnerving. It was really unnerving. And because it was every night, you know, and
but that's how you get good.
That's how you get good, because you learn to prove them wrong. But I hadn't really learned, and you'll understand this with a comedy background, but I hadn't really learned that the piece that I'd been missing for probably the first 500 auctions, and I'll say that again.
500.
For the first 500 auctions, guys. So whatever you're doing, just know that you can do more. Probably the first 500 auctions I did, I was taking as an art auctioneer, because my defense against that question, which was, where's the real auctioneer, was to come in a black suit and to do what I'd seen all the guys do and stand up there with that very stiff British formal approach, because I thought
Did you maybe channel a little bit of Mummy's accent in some of those situations?
Always. Sorry, Mom. It's the worst British accent. I just can't nail it. You would think I would be able to do it, but no. I mean, I really was like a Madonna. It was like a Madonna hybrid. It was
Right.
not good.
Oh, that's
I used
funny.
word like shall. I was so serious and self-important. I'm sure people were like, get off the stage. And then I had this sort of breakthrough moment where I was seriously hungover. I was in my late 20s.
Sure.
I'd gone out. It was a Friday night. The next day, it was Saturday, it was the auction. And I woke up with one of those, like, I don't think I can get out of bed. I'm so ill hangovers. I'm sorry if you've never had one of those. You definitely should at one point in your life.
Never. Not this week so far.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, I think at our age, it's less common. But in my 20s in New York City, it was not something that I had not experienced before. But I remember calling my landline, like calling every possible auctioneer I could think of. And they were like, no one takes auctions on a Saturday night except for you, because I took the auctions nobody wanted.
Yeah.
And I crawled on my hands and knees to the Central Park Boathouse. I mean, I was literally dying. I mean, I was like shaking. I felt so badly. And I remember sitting in the chair in a corner being like, oh my gosh, please don't be sick. Please don't be sick. And the funny thing is, you realize when you perform enough that when you get on stage, you get an adrenaline boost.
Totally.
Right? It sort of picks you up. But it didn't pick me back up into old British man accent. It picked me up into me as a late 20-year-old with kind of a funny sense of humor.
Right.
And I was staring at this woman who turned out to be the woman who had donated the first lot. And I realized she was a woman I'd been seated next to 5 years prior, when the guy I thought I was going to marry dumped me the night before. So I was the head of events. I arrived to work and I cried the entire lunch to one of our biggest clients. And she was so nice. Like, I can't even tell you. I started crying the minute we sat down. She's like, how was your night? And then I started sobbing.
Oh, gosh.
And I never stopped. Like, I cried the whole lunch and probably for like months afterwards. And she was so kind. And the first lot was a night at her home, cocktails and dinner. So instead of being really stiff and formal, I just really leaned into a joke about, you could go to her home and the cocktails and dinner are going to be amazing. But also, if you're in therapy, save your money. Go to Jennifer's house. She'll have you
Right.
patched up in an hour. And it was really the first time the audience responded in a way that wasn't talking over me. It was kind of a quiet. And I heard a couple of people laugh. And then I was so hungover. I was like, whatever, let's go. So I leaned into a joke about Mexico and senior frogs and how this would not be your experience. And also don't go down the slide with a tiny bikini top because you never know what will happen. And
Oh, interesting.
yeah, exactly. Well, I just saw your eyes light up.
Sorry, I missed it.
I know. A man literally turned his chair and I was like, wait a second. There's a
Turn his chair
different...
to look at you.
Yes.
Well,
First
there's
time
another
ever.
There's another
First
thing
time
about
ever.
charity auctions is there's a 12 top and 6 of the people aren't looking at the stage.
Right. And so what I really realized that night in this sort of true aha moment was, if I wanted to be different and to be good at this, I just had to change the style of doing it completely.
And that's one of your rules: sell as yourself, right?
Sell as yourself. Exactly.
So you were talking about selling kind of like lower grade things or non-obvious quality goods. And I spent 15 years selling advertising, and I always felt people were like, how do you sell? How do you pick up the phone and call strangers? And it was like, I'm really proud of what I sell. I think I work for great companies. I believe in what I'm trying to do. And it's harder to sell myself as a creative person than it was to sell somebody else's items. But what do you channel when you've got something you're not enthusiastic about to try to convince somebody else to buy?
I always think it's about finding the angle. You have to have multiple points of entry for any sale.
Yeah.
And that is definitely true in auctioneering. I did a negotiation workshop at Fast Company at the Innovation Festival yesterday. And I love this example because someone handed me a lot, I guess it was 3 weeks ago. I was getting on stage, and right before I walked out, 2 minutes before, this woman said to me, we have something else we want to put in the auction. And I'm always really cautious about that because that's when you get the really obscure things.
Right,
I'll have someone hops on stage and I'm like, do we even know if you have this house? Like, have you just had too much to drink?
Yeah.
But this woman sort of grabbed me and she's like, I'm one of the co-chairs and I want to donate our house in Aspen. I promise it's beautiful. She said, it's a ski house. So, just let me know if that could work for maybe a week or something. And the first thing I said to her was, is it a ski house only, or they use it all year? And she sort of thought for a second. She's like, yeah, they can use it whenever they want. And the reason I asked that question is because if I walk out onto a stage of people and there are 1,000 people in the room.
Yep.
There are probably 10 people in that room who are actually capable of bidding at the level that I need them to.
Right.
And probably 6 of those will do it. If I walk out on a stage and I say to everyone, I have a ski house, I have immediately shut out 80% of the audience. More than that, anyone who's old, anyone who has an injury, anyone who doesn't like winter, anyone who doesn't like to know how to ski or know how to ski.
Yep.
But if I can say a house in Aspen, like you may not like winter, but you probably like spring, fall, or summer,
Right.
or you should probably go see a therapist.
And as they say out there, you come for the winter and you stay for the summer, and the summer seasons out there are spectacular.
Right, exactly.
So you got to open the aperture on what you're selling. You told a story about, oh gosh, going to call on a company, and the first thing the woman said to you was, "Our CEO hates art."
Right. Yes. That was an incredible moment in my life because I'd been dealing with them for years and we were having coffee and I'd brought a proposal from Christie's that had been put together. We had been working on it for months.
Based on assumptions of what they want.
Based on years of a relationship with the previous CMO. That was really the kicker. I had worked with them on a multi-year contract all around Asia doing a Warhol exhibition. And they had a changeover in the CMO and a changeover in the CEO. And I walked in with a multi-million-dollar proposal sitting in my bag, ready to launch into the next chapter of this relationship. And I said, so tell me a little bit about yourself. And she told me a little bit about herself. I didn't talk. And I just waited as she then told me, and one other thing about our CEO, I'll be honest, he really hates art. And I was like, oh no. She's like, he loves sports. And we had a huge client who was about to have a sports memorabilia sale.
And Bob's your uncle.
Bob's your uncle. I never even took the proposal out of my bag. I did not even mention it, you know?
You won't be needing the PowerPoint my staff stayed up all night putting together.
Right.
Because that's going to unsell
that would sink.
you.
Yeah,
Totally.
that would sink this conversation because I didn't listen to what you said.
All right, I got to read something from your bio, or remind myself what your bio said. You sell as yourself, using charisma, humor, and the ability to connect meaningfully with audiences. We've talked about connecting with audiences. How much of what you do is seduction?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Seduction. I mean, I like to think of it more as charm.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, you know, we always say in the South, you catch more bees with honey.
Sure.
And I've had a lot of people say that to me when I get off stage. But I think selling as a female is different than selling as a male.
That's what I wanted to get to.
So as an auctioneer, I remember there was a female auctioneer who was at one point leading the art auctioneering at Christie's. And she taught a couple of auctioneering classes. And she said to us all, and this was when I was very young at the company, she said, you know, during charity auctions, I like to slink over to, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, I would know more.
You're not a slinker.
I'm not a slinker, but also you're shutting off the person's partner, their wife, immediately.
Right.
Like
you raise that paddle, we're taking separate cars home.
I mean, seriously, like what is that line, right? You got to figure out what that line is. And so I never get off stage as an auctioneer. People are like, oh, and then you do jump off stage. I'm like, never get off stage because me walking up to a table is not the optic I want. I am not for sale, for the record. I'll say that again. I am not for sale. But my point is that when I get on that stage, I can't go to a guy and say, hey, Paul, what happened to all your money?
Yeah.
And I have tons
Thought you were a man.
Yeah, exactly. Like I am not there to emasculate.
If you can't afford it, maybe you're in the wrong place.
Right. And immediately I've shut down the male ego on that one. Absolutely no question. That person is turned away from me. And they also, quote unquote, hate me by the end of the night. Because that is the other distinction. Women, I can say this even in the car auctioneering, like people either like hate you or they like you. And sometimes it takes some time, especially in a role that they don't expect you to be in. But I think as a woman being on stage, I can use the more bees with honey.
Yeah.
I can be kind. For me in charity auctioneering, the sky is always blue. I would never insult anybody, male or female. If someone looks like George Clooney, would I mention it? Yes. If he doesn't look like George Clooney, would I mention it? Yes. But that's because I'm a woman and that's the way that I sell. I think it's fun to make people feel good. I think it's fun to watch them come out of their shell because of compliments, but I do it equally with men and women. I can't use that other gear. I can't go after someone and say, Paul, what a cheap guy you are, Paul. Something I've definitely heard.
That a guy might do.
That I see them do. I have tons. I represent male auctioneers and I see them do it all the time. It's fine. It doesn't work for me.
So what's the disadvantage to being a woman in that position?
Well, I think at the beginning, it was, as I said, it was really unnerving. But I think when you become confident in what you do, it doesn't really matter because you're willing to stand up for yourself. But I think it takes a lot more when people don't expect you to be in that role.
Right.
And so how you present yourself, I think, frankly, like anything, takes time. But I see it as an advantage now. You know, what used to be this sort of like, well, Lydia's the woman, she can do the ones that nobody wants, right? But now if there's a breast cancer research foundation, they're like, well, it has to be Lydia or one of the women on her team. Like
totally.
it can't, that conversation would never have taken place 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
And then it became like I was one of one, which they were like, we don't even know her name, but there's a woman on stage who's super sassy and we want her.
Yeah.
And so they were like, well, there's only one woman, so it's got to be Lydia.
Why do you think you're sassy?
I try to be sassy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I like
What's the
being
difference
sassy.
between confident and sassy?
Just being fun. I mean, people say a lot of times, like there's a line, and you love comedy. I love comedy.
Yeah.
There's a line on stage. And I mean, could I cross over into that line and be super mean and sharp? Sure. That's not funny to me. What's funny is toying that line. You know, someone's about to bid
Right.
and I'm going back to them and I'm making like a little bit of a joke,
Right.
making more of a joke. And they're like, wait, is she joking? I can't tell. I'm always joking. And then they bid. And so for me, that's the way that I employ humor.
Who's your favorite comedian besides Mike Albanese?
Oh, Mike Albanese.
That's Mike Albanese.
Oh, Mike Albanese. You're a comedian. I didn't
He's
know
a great
it.
comic.
Well, I will come to your shows. I love comedy.
I sit in the pocket back here. You wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know.
I surprise you eventually.
All right. I'm
With
here
a-
for
with
it.
a quip.
I'm here for it, Mike. I love John Oliver.
Oh, yeah.
Love John Oliver.
Yeah.
I've seen him. One of the benefits I was saying before is
Sure.
of being on stage is that I get to see a lot of fun things at the galas. And he did something for Comic Relief last December, and I was on stage I'd gone on stage right before him, and I got off, and my sides were cracking. I was
Yeah.
laughing so hard.
Oh, he's brilliant. When did you decide confidence was your brand?
I think it's because people kept asking me about it. You know, I've written 2 books. I wrote the first book about selling because women would always come up to me and say, I could never do what you do. Like, I could never get on stage and sell something.
Do you
I hate
think
selling.
do you think of yourself as a salesperson?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I sell all the time.
Yeah.
When I was at Christie's, I was a global managing director of strategic partnerships, and I sold partnerships. As an auctioneer, I sell all the time.
Right. But one is like a corporate sales relationship, and then the other one is real-time, spontaneous, in
Sales.
action, on stage
Yeah.
sales. Wow. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that for me was the white space that I saw. And as a writer, I think you write to what you know. And when women kept saying that to me, I kept thinking to myself, like, I didn't grow up. You know, I didn't grow up in New York City where I feel like women are taught to go after things with their abandon. I grew up in Louisiana. My mom's British. And in both of those cultures, you're kind of taught to be a little quieter. That's not, they're not like, go after whatever you want. It's kind of like, okay, just, you know, sit there, look pretty. How's the house looking? Great. We're good. That's how my childhood was. That was what I saw. And so as I grew up and I grew into this, I realized if I could learn it, I could teach it. Right. And so that's why I wrote The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. Then when I was on tour for that book, the word confidence kept coming up and people kept saying to me, how are you so confident? Like, you get up there. I have men who come up to me like, how can I make my daughter as confident as you? And I feel like that. I really do. And so I decided to write another book about it.
Why do you think? What's missing in the way I raised my daughter that might be leading her to be less confident than I would like her to be?
I think it's the assumption that there are things that you can and can't do. So much of my confidence came from my parents. I'm one of 4 kids, boy, girl, the first daughter. And when we were little, my dad used to line us up in front of the house, and it was in order of age. And then we would race the car. He would drive, and the 4 of us would sprint.
Right.
And then we would get in the car and go to school. And my dad would beat us every morning. And so it was always about competition. It was always about like anything my brothers could do, I could do. And
Sure.
I think it was probably a time management. My dad was like, well, we have a soccer team, so you all play soccer. Like, oh, we do basketball. We all do basketball. And there was never a day where I said to my dad, I'd like to go to law school. And my dad wouldn't say, great, let's get the books, let's go.
Right.
And that as a parent is so incredible because I have a lot of friends who did not have that in their father figures or their moms.
Because they were women.
Because they were women. It
Yeah.
was like, again, going back to like, you know, when you're a mom, when you're doing these are all amazing things that you want, but don't shut off that other side. Like, you can do that too.
You think that's changed in the last 3 decades?
I hope so. I think it's changed for some people. I don't think it's changed for all.
How does your, if it's not becoming too personal, like,
Yeah.
how does your husband emulate that in the way he talks to your daughter or daughters?
Daughters. So we have 3 children, girl, boy, girl.
My mother's name was Beatrice, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. It's a wonderful name.
I read that in the New York Times. So
You did?
it's public information.
It is public information. My children all have old people names.
Yeah,
Beatrice,
yeah.
Henry, and Eloise.
I love it.
They're like at an old nursing
Like
home.
a Jane Austen novelette.
And my husband is Chris. He's like, I guess I don't really fit into this.
Right. Yeah.
You know, my husband and I, our marriage, I would say, has had an evolution over time. Like most people that we know, our parents came from somewhat traditional, or we came from traditional parents. Both of our parents are still married 50 plus years.
Yep, mine too.
And
they're not alive anymore, but they were married for 55 years.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, yes, thank you.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I think a lot of our marriage now is so much more about partnership. My husband is a fractional CFO and I'm one of his clients now. So truly, because that's what it took for our marriage to continue on and for us to be the kind of parents that our parents were to us. The reality is I travel a lot at certain times of the year. I will be on a plane like every single week, basically September through the first week of December.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And we want to be present parents. And so when I was starting the agency, the Lydia Fenet Agency, which is the auctioneering side of my business, my husband is a fractional CFO. And at the time he was coming out of one client relationship and I just needed help. And I sort of said to him, like, I can do this, but this is the stuff that slows me down. And in any business, what you're really looking for are the things that you can do endlessly and never get tired of.
Yeah.
And that for me is speaking, being on the road, doing the auctions, writing books, like that I can do for days, podcasting, things I love to do. But if you sit me in front of an Excel spreadsheet,
Right.
I will cry and complain. And then I will kick things and I will be angry and mean.
That's why you marry a fractional CFO.
Exactly. And it was something that happened. So Chris and I have been together for 20 years. It's really happened in the past 3 years. But that has solved a huge piece of that because he never travels for work. I travel a lot. And when I walk out of the door, he knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And when I come home, if he has to go somewhere, I know exactly what's going on. So we really treat that piece of the pie as partners. And that, I think for us, has allowed us to have a really solid, healthy marriage. I'm probably like Sandra Bullock right now. To find out. Someone's going to be like, actually. But for now, I think we have a solid, healthy marriage, Chris.
How does it feel when you make assurances about what an auction will produce and it doesn't live up to those assurances?
Oh, it's hard. It's really hard. It actually just happened to me this week in a very high profile auction that I'm very vested in. And the first year I helped them create the auction. It was amazing. It surpassed every expectation. I said to my husband when I got home that night, that was an 11 out of 10. And I don't know what happens next year because I don't think I can beat it. And then last year was like a 15 out of 10. I don't even know what happened. It was the best night I've ever had on stage. The room came together. We made $2.5 million more than we thought we were going to. Not 200,000, $2.5 million more. And I was less worried about it this year because I thought, well, if this is a rocket ship to the moon, perhaps, even though we all know that that's not the reality. And this year was not that year. It was super flat on stage. There were some huge people who left midway through the auction because things were running late. It was hard. It was really hard. And I was so disappointed. We made a lot of money that night, but I was so vested in it. And, as a performer.
From an ego perspective or as a reputational kind of thing?
I mean, reputation is an interesting thing because you control your own narrative. On Instagram, everything can always be beautiful. But for me, I mean, that's the truth.
That's the theme of my Instagram.
Mine too. I think it's more just from a personal standpoint and always wanting to do more and be better, even understanding that that's not always going to be the case. And there has to be a level at which things sort of set, especially at a charity gala. But I think more than anything, I sit on the board of the organization and I knew how much I wanted to make.
Right.
And we made close, but we didn't make it. And I don't like to not make it. I want people to be like, wow, how did that just happen? Like it did the first 2 years where we were sort of like, how do we even give this money away? We've made so much more than we thought we were going to. So that was disappointing, but I think again, it's just part of it. And you learn as a performer, you're going to have those nights. I don't need people to tell me I'm good or not. I know if I'm on or not.
Right.
And there's also comfortability in understanding that. I'm like, okay, so next year, if that happens, I now know X and I can make those things change in order to make it better. but never feels good.
Mike, how does it feel when you bomb? Not that you ever bomb.
Mike, tell us about bombing.
Bombing is the unfortunate necessary part of comedy and performing.
Yeah.
You don't know how to do better. Because I've also hosted a lot of auctions and a lot of charity auctions where you're trying to get people excited about things. I've had auctions where the guy who donated the item had to buy it because nobody else was buying it because nobody was paying
That's
attention.
happened. I've seen that happen many times. You're like, I'm going to sell it to you, but I can tell you don't want it, sir.
Yeah, and that was a fun one because then it was a very expensive bottle like Camus or something like that, like one of those or Opus ones or something like that where it was like thousands of dollars and he was just like, I'll buy it, and he bought his own thing and then he opened it and drank it with. It was just like the weirdest thing ever. But,
Hilarious.
the same thing, bombing is just is a part of life. The worst bomb is when you're bombing in front of people you know.
Right.
Those are called open
Yes.
mics.
Yeah, well, I do a show every Friday, and I have to come up with new stuff, and it's bombing with new stuff or bombing with or doing the stuff that they've heard before because I don't have anything new enough.
Right.
That seems like a bomb as well, and I'm like, this is gonna be awful.
When you do like old stuff in front of your comedy friends, like that's just shame.
Yeah,
it's just like I haven't worked hard enough since the last time I saw you to try new stuff.
You're like, I have not been interesting enough to come up with new content for you.
Exactly, yeah.
But then, Mike, don't you feel like now you have all this content because I've been here, so now you can talk all about charity auctioneering and the weird world that it is?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'm in. Yeah, I'm gonna steal all this.
Yeah.
Doing research, watching your stuff, it makes me. You'd think it might make me want to get on stage and try it again. It makes me want to never do it again because it feels insulting.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
To try to get up there and emulate what somebody spent thousands of evenings perfecting, and is a real skill. And so that's what I took away from prepping.
Well, I'll tell you this. If you want to be a good charity auctioneer,
Yep.
you got to get back on stage. It's like being a comedian. You cannot, you have to do so many that you get used to the sound and you get used to the chatter.
I don't want to be one. It's you get to a point where you're like, do I care enough about something to crawl across the broken glass that is the process of improvement?
Yes.
And at this point in life, I'm not going to try anything new. I'm going to try to keep getting better at podcasting and comedy and leave other skills to people who have already invested the time.
But I think there's crossover skills.
Yes,
totally.
Those are soft skills based around your hard skills. So
Truly.
you could probably do comedy for the first time better than somebody who's never done auction. You know what I mean?
Because I'm not scared of stage.
And the other, vice versa. I think comedians are great. I've hosted a lot of award galas, a lot of award shows, presentation, like all that stuff. And it seems like, oh, I'm nervous. What's going to happen? And then as soon as you get up there, you're like, oh, this is the same thing.
It's so true. Same
There's a lot of
stage.
crossover.
Yeah.
All right,
Well, I could teach you guys to be auctioneers, just FYI.
Are you guys hiring?
I trained everyone for 12 years.
I'll do it.
I mean, seriously.
All right, great. I'm in.
Okay.
Can I keep my beard?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Keep the beard.
Let's go.
It's not Delta Airlines. Okay.
Delta Airlines.
What's the difference between confidence and false confidence?
Well,
Where's the line, I should say? That's a better question.
false confidence, I think, is sometimes necessary to become confident. But what drives me crazy is false confidence when someone has nothing to back it up.
Right.
They walk out,
Yep.
let's take auctioneering. We were just talking about this.
Yeah.
Let's take auctioneering. And someone's like, I am a great auctioneer. And they get on stage and I'm like, no, you're not. They're like,
Yeah.
yes, I am. I'm like, actually, you are not a good auctioneer. And so I see that because I train auctioneers and have trained auctioneers for 12 years. I see that in the auctioneering world, especially in the charity auctioneering world, where there are a couple of people in particular who I'd always heard by reputation they were very good. And part of the reason I started my agency was because I'd been referring one of them a lot of business. And I never go to galas because I'm always on stage at galas, so I don't need to go to a gala. And I went to one and sort of said to the people, listen, I don't want to, please don't ask me to be the auctioneer. I just want to come and enjoy it for a night. I want to be able to have a glass of wine and relax with my husband and not think about being on stage. And then I watched this gentleman get on stage and my husband leaned over and said, oh my God, no wonder you have so much business if he's the person you've been referring things to. And I realized at that moment that I created a standard for auctioneering. And if I was going to be referring someone, I should actually have either trained them or know if they were good enough. Because at the end of the day, these nonprofits, their operating budget is based on how much you raise on the stage 9 times out of 10. And so if you put someone who doesn't know what they're doing up there and is drunk or, whatever it is, I mean, I say that, but I've seen...
Oh, wait, you're not supposed to be drunk when you try to do
some
auction?
people do, and it is, it's their style, but I've seen people who are so drunk that they can barely speak. And I'm like... This is not a joke for the Boys and Girls Club. Like, this is whether or not their lights are on next year.
Right.
So And again, I think that goes back to going at a very young age and also being a woman. Like I've never had a glass of wine before I get on stage because the optics on a young drunk woman, not good, right?
No.
But like a bombastic guy, super funny on stage.
Yeah.
So
to a point.
Yeah, right. Well, exactly. To the point
I saw a guy, the High Museum in Atlanta has a wine lunch art auction. Do you know about this?
I do. They called me last year. I was
this guy who did it was like doing like Elvis karate kicks all through he was phenomenal. He was so good. I can't remember his name.
Was it CK Sweat?
I don't know. Grayish hair, maybe. He was killer.
I don't know.
It's so funny that like the auctioneering community, is it like a community like comedians, everybody knows who everybody else is and what their reputation is?
Well, I trained a lot of them at Christie's many years ago, and now they all work. And so I know their style. I know so many things about them. And when I started my agency, I have 6 of them that I trained at Christie's who were sort of the ones that I always saw on those first days. And there's always that one who I'm like, you're going to pass, like no problem, you know, and 4 days later, of course, they're still there. And there are other people who I was taking just because I needed additional people, but there were always those people. I'm sure you have it. I'm sure you have it. There's something about them on stage that you want to watch.
Yeah.
And so it's really about honing that skill. And so it's been fun to watch their careers really take off as they spent the time on stage and they did their 10,000, 20,000 hours.
Right. How do you remember what the last bid was? That was like the hardest thing for me because I'd be like, were we at 11 or were we at 12,000 for this weekend in Vail or whatever?
I think, well, practice, I think, is part of it, just doing it over and over again, but also really being intentional about the underbidders. So making sure that you remember who they are by either coming up with, I use a lot of like celebrity doppelgangers or what you're wearing, like the gentleman in black. You'd be like, Johnny Cash has shown up to the auction, whatever it is. So then when I look back at you, I don't have to think to myself, like, where is the bidder? I'm just sort of like $11,000 to the gentleman on the right who looks like Johnny Cash.
Right. Okay. Got it. We're at 55. We're going to wrap this up soon. By the way, I figured out what kind of confidence I have last night. I have I'm willing to carry a doggy bag out of a fancy restaurant confidence.
Oh, there you go.
That's my confidence.
Isn't that just being a New Yorker?
As I carried a filet out of Il Molino.
Yeah, I think that's
much
just
to
being a
my
New
wife's
Yorker.
shame.
You've just moved here, but I think anybody would do that.
No, is that good?
Yeah.
All right, let's do a little
If you
fill
have
in.
the confidence to leave a fillet at El Molino, then that's a different type
Dude,
of confidence.
I think that is a
Take it away.
dereliction of duty. That is that's a crime against humanity.
When you're a real New Yorker is when you give that to a homeless person as you're walking down the street.
Because
Am I
you realize
correct?
I don't want to carry it.
there's
No, because you're a kind
there's
person.
bodegas for that.
Because you're sort of like a mean New Yorker, but also you're a kind person.
All right, we'll do a little fill in the blank here. The key to confidence is blank.
Knowing your worth.
Knowing your worth. I like that. When I'm confident, it's because blank.
I feel like I'm wearing the right thing, walking down the street to the right place, and living my best life. Those were 3 answers.
When I'm confident, it's because blank.
Because I've tried something really hard and I've been able to do it.
Okay. If I only had blank, I'd be more confident.
I don't think I could be more confident. Call my siblings.
I like that. I like that.
I think people want me to be less confident.
I think my
Sorry,
siblings might
guys.
say the same thing about me with a little less respect. But people who aren't confident generally lack blank.
The ability to try new things that allow them to understand how confident they could be. They're just living in a safe lane.
If I could have been born in any other time or location, it would have been blank.
This is a hard question because I have so many versions of myself. There's Lydia who lives in Hong Kong, Lydia who lives in London. So I think I was born exactly at the right time in the right space.
I like that.
But there are also 20 other versions of me living their best life around the world.
Now, Lydia, I understand you've prepared a haiku for us about confidence.
I have, and I have to say that my children helped me prepare this haiku. I had to ask them what
That's
it was.
okay. That's okay.
All right, here's my haiku. The gavel slams. Are you ready to spin big? It's my stage tonight.
Oh, I like that. Closing with confidence. Lydia, it's been so nice to talk to you. I'm glad to know you. Your podcast is called Claim Your Confidence. Who are some great guests that you've had on?
Well, recently I had on Henrik Lundqvist, who's a big hockey star in New York. I've had everyone from Glenn Close to Huma Abedin.
Wow, cool.
But I think the most exciting and impressive guest is a man named Paul Ollinger, who's coming on in a couple weeks.
Nice. Yeah, I've heard about him.
Yeah.
He's going to do some great
comedy.
things.
Yep.
Once he breaks into some of these 3-person audiences in Brooklyn, he's going to go to big heights.
Well, That's what he's working on, so I can see it happening.
Thank you so much for joining us. And you all look for Lydia Fenet's podcast, Claim Your Confidence, and her book, Claim Your Confidence, and the smartest woman, sorry, not the most
Powerful.
The most powerful woman in the room is you. Lydia, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Paul.